Good Tuesday evening to you, aviation aficionados. I'm Jamie Beckett, AOPA Foundation Ambassador in Florida. It says so right there on the screen. And that guy over there, that's Pat Brown, all the way from Texas. We're here to do episode 30. Pat, 30 episodes of Ask an Ambassador. It's amazing. It doesn't feel any more than 28.
Exactly. Time flies when you're having fun, as they say.
It really does. And hey, you know, we have a policy here. We always have a topic. And tonight's topic is destinations. Pat and I have been doing this for quite a while, just playing around with airplanes like ski bums, hanging around at the chalet. We've been some places. So we're going to talk about where we went and what the experience was like and places we might like to go. I'd like your participation, but of course, as you know, our standard policy is you can ask any question you want on any topic you want, and we'll do our best to answer it. You might even send in a question for the Stump the Ambassador feature, and you might end up getting some pretty cool swag out of that. In any case, Pat, I actually like this idea, destinations, because, you know, in the 30 some odd years I've been flying, as a CFI, there's a lot of local flying. I've landed at some of the same airports, literally hundreds and hundreds of times as you have. But I've gone some pretty far distances as well, and it's been both the local ones and the distant ones. There's been some fun, there's been some planning, and there's been some surprises. How about you?
Oh yeah, I have lots of those. So the challenge is going to be paring it down to keeping it in an hour. So.
And keeping it family friendly, because sometimes pilots use terminology.
Yeah, there was that bar in Tallahassee one night, I vaguely remember.
Well, hey, let's start off talking about one of the biggies. Chris Ruff is right in there. What are the best sites to see? Visible satellite images of clouds. Oh. Man, you're talking about weather radar, Chris? I'm wondering. Satellite images, because, you know, we're generally not looking for pictures of clouds. We're looking for what's the cloud doing.
I would just go to aviationweather.gov.
Yeah, that's not a bad one.
Look at the weather satellites right there.
I think we've got a couple pictures coming up in this episode where we might have encountered a tiny little bit of weather.
Yeah. There's a couple of them, I think, on the queue here.
Now, let's start off with the second biggest aeronautical event in North America every year, Sun and Fun. Now, I've flown in there a number of times, usually in an airplane that's going to be on display. You've flown in as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been Sun and Fun a whole bunch of times. Most of the time we fly into Tampa exec, but one year we flew into and based out of Fort Myers and flew up to Sun and Fun in a beautiful 210, and then a couple of years later, we actually based at Tampa exec, but decided to fly in my Comanche. And that was the second time that I flew into Sun and Fun, and I will say proudly that I hit the dot both times.
Well, I'm gonna quiz you on this because I consider myself very fortunate. I've been going to I don't know that I've missed a Sun and Fun in the last 30 some odd years. I'm always there working in some capacity, but when I fly in, I'm usually flying in an airplane that's going to be on display, often at the AOPA campus,
right?
Which means I fly in before the NOTAM goes active. Now, that doesn't mean it's a relaxing flight. I have flown a 152 in and been sandwiched between two Draken fighters. And I had no problem staying behind the first one, but I had a real problem staying in front of the second one. Now, when you go to an off-site airport, when you fly from Texas, and rather than going to Lakeland, you go to an off-site airport, what's the logic behind that?
Mostly it's just because I don't want to deal with some of the crazies that fly into the trade shows and don't bother to read the NOTAMs. The notices to air missions, by the way.
Yep.
That they don't bother to read the NOTAMs, and I hear these controllers really there ought to be a special place in heaven for some of these controllers, because they maintain an incredible level of professionalism and and relatively good humor most of the time, even in the face of people that just simply didn't read the NOTAMs. But really, it's really just to keep the stress levels down. And the other thing is I would like to be able to leave when I want to leave, as far as with the airplane, and not having to wait till the show is over or the NOTAM is lifted or what have you. So typically, I'll go into Kissimmee or I'll go into Tampa Exec when I'm going to Sun and Fun, and we can, when we get to Osh, we can talk about that later. But yeah, so reading the NOTAMs is really important if you're going to fly into Lakeland, and the same thing when you're going to fly into Osh. There's a whole thing about how to do it. They want you to either print out either in a magic marker on a piece of like 8.5 by 11 typing paper, IFR, VFR, and I think IFR too. And they want to know if you're going to be doing show parking or if you're going to the FBO. So typically, I'll print out VFR on one, IFR on another, and FBO on a third, and you just put it up on the glare shield that you're taxiing, and that way the marshalers, can tell you which way to go. So that would be kind of the experience. Plus, you better be used to just being referred to as the green Cessna, rock your wings. Because that happens at both places, and in fact, depending on what satellite airport you go into in Oshkosh, they'll do the same thing. Particularly at Fond du Lac, they'll do the same thing if it gets that busy. And they'll just call, Red Cessna, rock your wings, and assuming you rock your wings, they'll identify you. At Lakeland, they'll say, fly west of the highway, and then once they send you to fly west of the highway from the power plant around the lake, then you turn left and head down to that upside down wedding cake looking thing, a cell phone tower, whatever it is. And then you just keep flying until you're basically perpendicular to the east-west runway, and good luck from there.
Yeah, I got to admit, it can be stressful flying into those places, even if you are prepared, because there's so much traffic, much more than most of us are used to. And I'm sorry to say, I actually have seen planes collide at Sun and Fun, and there is a real desire to start sightseeing while you're still in the air. You have to fight that. You have to fly the airplane and not get distracted, because, hey, a distraction is a distraction, and they're not good for you. So
the last time we went into Sun and Fun, my partner in the airplane was in the right seat, and I gave him my cell phone to shoot some video. Unfortunately, it was too big to be able to send up for Donnie to put in this thing, but it was about 2 minutes of excitement, and it was only after the fact, and when I looked at the video, all the things that I actually missed on the ground because I was so busy watching airplanes.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, Chris Ruff is back where he's looking for, he says aviationweather.gov has low resolution images, and he's wondering if somebody in the audience can help him out. Chris, give us a little bit of specifics. Are you looking for radar returns, or are you looking for pictures of clouds? Because they're going to be in different places. So if you can specify, that'd be helpful. And Elijah G is back. Hi, Elijah. Always nice to see you again. And Mark Grady apparently has nothing to do tonight, Pat, because he's here, and apparently he thinks he's our fan, and that seems weird to me.
He keeps showing up, and I think he's neglecting the welfare ducks, I think, is really what's happening. And if you know Mark, you'll know what I'm talking about.
He should be at his computer console writing away and feeding those ducks. That's true. Mark, get back to it. Well, hey, you brought up AirVenture. That's the biggest aviation gathering in North America. Sun and Fun is in April down south in Florida. In the summer, we have Oshkosh up north, AirVenture. I got to admit, I've only ever flown up to Oshkosh on Delta, landed in Chicago, and rented a car and gone up. I just don't want to deal with that, although I love the show. Have you flown into Oshkosh for AirVenture, or do you fly to a nearby airport?
We fly into Fond du Lac, and for the same reason that I fly into a satellite airport in Florida. I really want to be able to arrive when we want to, and to depart when we want to, and especially if the show is going on at Osh, there are limited times that you can fly in, and of course limited times you can fly out, because the airport's closed for I don't know, 4 hours or 5 hours or something. I don't remember exactly, but the airport's closed and for part of that, and we just want to have the freedom to be able to come and go as we wish when we're arriving and departing, and taking into account weather delays or anything that that might delay us on our trip up. So we typically go into Fond du Lac. There's a temporary tower there. You would know that if you look at the NOTAM for Oshkosh. And I don't remember what the frequency is, but I'll refresh my memory before the next Oshkosh. Temporary tower there. You call them up and just let them know you're coming in. And if it's real busy, they'll call you by the color of your airplane and the type of, like a white Cirrus or whatever. And they're really, really good at sequencing you in. You can either park on the grass, or if you call the FBO in advance, you can actually make a reservation to park on the tarmac. They charge you for that. I don't think they charge you to park on the grass. They charge you to park on the ramp. But no tie downs there. They just chock the airplane really good. And but it's much more convenient because they'll pull the airplane out for you when it's time for you to go. So anyway, that's what we do going up to Osh. But there's still. Go ahead, Jamie. I'm sorry.
Makes all sense in the world, and Mark Grady is giving you a thumbs up, saying, "Amen. Fond du Lac is the way to go." And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for. There are those satellite airports around. I'm based out of Winter Haven, 14 miles from Lakeland. We're just packed to the gills during Sun and Fun for that exact reason that you brought up. During the air show, Lakeland's locked down. You can't get in or out. You are stuck there. You have to wait for the flag to go down at the end of the show. Whereas at Winter Haven, Bartow, Tampa, Exec, Kissimmee, you can just leave whenever you want to. And same thing for arrival. It's not nearly as busy.
Actually, leaving whenever you want to, that comes with a caveat too. This past year, we went into Tampa Exec, and the day that we wanted to leave, the weather sucked. That's a technical term. Yes. And in fact, Tom Haynes and Elizabeth Tennyson, our boss, and everybody listening knows Tom. Tom and Elizabeth were flying home the same day, and so there were three airplanes. There was Tom and Elizabeth. There was me and my party and our Cirrus, and there was another party and another Cirrus that were all flying together. And there was about 7 airplanes, maybe 8 airplanes lined up to go. The weather was horrible. Clearance delivery at Tampa Exec is actually approach control, not a separate clearance delivery frequency. And approach control was so busy with airplanes coming into the area that they couldn't. Long story made short, it was about an hour and a half wait with the engine running to try to get our clearance. I finally got smart and called the old 800 number that flight service used to have, before you could call and get your clearance direct from approach or center, according to the chart supplement. You can do that now. But there used to be an 800 number. I still had that in my telephone. And I called them up, and it was flight service. And I said, could I get a clearance? They said, well, we don't do that anymore. Would you like the telephone number for Tampa approach or Orlando, whatever the approach is there? And I said, yeah, because all I've got is the frequency. And they gave me the telephone number. So I called them instead. Happened to get the same guy that was working the frequency, but I had him on the phone. It took me, by the way, 87 times hitting redial to get him. And then he said, call me back when you're ready to take off. I got to call him back 57 times to call him back to get on. So yes, you can leave when you want to, but you better be ready for that.
Well, and Serafino BP points out the question is any insight as to why weather forecasters can have drastically different forecasts when using different models. I've seen the TAF, terminal area forecast, at 2 airports just 10 nautical miles apart be significantly as different as IMC versus VMC. It could just be geography. I live in a town with 60 lakes, 60, a lot of lakes. We very often in this time of year where it cools down at night, but the water stays relatively warm, we'll have very dense fog in the morning, and it's low IFR at my airport. But 10 miles away, 14 miles away at Lakeland, they're VFR. Yeah. Because they don't have those lakes all around them. So it can be legitimate. It's not just a difference of opinion. By the way, Bearded Aviator is with us and says he hopes to fly to Sun and Fun this year. Just got his certificate. So Bearded Aviator, yeah, good for you, man. Let us know where you're coming from. I'd be curious, and I hope you make it. And Ingram Leedy, Well, I got to fess up. I know Ingram. He's the coolest dude in America. Wow. Right behind Keith Richards. Ingram's right there. Does AOPA have any special educational events at Sun and Fun newbie attendee? As a matter of fact, Ingram, we do. Every day, all day, we actually have a pavilion tent where Pat and I do Rusty Pilots. We do all sorts of things. We have guest speakers. Some of the smartest, most capable aviation people in the business show up on that stage. So I'll tell you what, Ingram, give me a call. I'll hook you up and I'll let you know what's happening in advance. You know what? I'll come to your house and do one just for you, one-on-one if you want. You know, Pat, we were talking about doing this episode, and I think there's a fairly fascinating thing in our travels that we have done similarly. We have both flown back to the airport where we learned to fly. Now, I don't know how far that is for you. For me, it was 1,000 miles. How far away is the airport you learned to fly, and what was was it just nostalgia? I just want to touch down on that runway again?
Well, yeah, part of it. I got my private and my commercial ticket at Brooks Field in southern Lower Michigan. If you know geography, it's right there. Southern Lower Michigan. That's where I got my private and my commercial ticket. And when we moved to Texas, it was just like, one of these days I would like to fly back to my home airport. So for a high school reunion, about 6 years ago, I guess it was, we flew up there. That was the first time that I did a totally uneventful trip, other than the fact that the only weather we had to deal with was just a little bit of blob of weather just north of Memphis. Otherwise, it was a totally uneventful trip. And the second one was most recently back in July for another high school class reunion. This was one of the big ones. It happens to end in a 0. And I won't tell you what the first number is.
30, right?
But so, say again?
30, right?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah. So, and that one was a really, really interesting trip. Donnie, can you put up the Michigan slide, not the number 2, but the first one that I sent you? This is what the weather looked like in Texas when we left. Now, you'll see that there's a squiggly line there, and there's the airplane on the north side of that front that stretched all the way from Dallas all the way over to East Texas. Now, our direct to our refueling spot up in Indiana would have taken us, look at the yellow portion of that course, essentially would have taken us through the very worst part of it. So knowing that, I was working with Houston Approach, then Houston Center, and then Regional Approach in Fort Worth. And now this looks terrible. But I wanted to put this up for a reason, because this looks really terrible. And all the armchair quarterbacks are saying, you're an idiot to fly through that. And based on this, I would certainly agree. But Donnie, if you can put up Michigan trip number 2 there, that next slide, that's what it really looked like. And I wanted to put this up because it also highlights the difference in what you can see on ADS-B versus what you can see on XM. And it isn't so much the difference in the source of the weather, but it's the device that you're looking at it on. ForeFlight and iPad tends to pixelate the weather, whereas in this particular case, I'm looking at a Cirrus MFD, and it rounds out the edges. And of course, this is zoomed in a whole lot closer than what that other one was. Can you go back to that the other Michigan picture real quick, Donnie? See, that's a real, long view of it, if you will, or a high altitude view of it. But when you zoom in, if you can go back, if you can go there, that's what it was really looking like. And so, whereas it looked like really bad, the fact of the matter is that we were in the clouds through that whole first and second leg. We were probably in the clouds not more than about 30 or 45 seconds. It wasn't clear, but we weren't IMC. So, if you're willing to work with ATC and whatnot, oftentimes you can find a way to make the trip work. Bruce Landsberg, who used to run ASI for years and years and years. Um, he was fond of saying that oftentimes you're going to be able to go, it just might not be right now. And that was kind of the situation that we found ourselves in, a little bit of a twist on that. You know, we wanted to go where we wanted to go. We just had to go kind of a circuitous route to get there, and basically from Houston to Dallas and then over. It added about an hour to the trip. And of course, as which made that leg probably 4 3/4 hours. So I was doing an awful lot of fuel calculating on the way to make sure that we were going to be able to land with not just the legal minimums, but more than the legal minimums. And when we landed, we had a little bit over an hour reserve in VFR. So it was a great trip.
Outstanding. Donnie, by the way, viewers, you should be giving a thumbs up to Donnie, the greatest producer in America. This guy works so hard to make Pat and I look smart. It's just amazing. Donnie, can you put up that picture of weather I sent you earlier? Because I'll show you a visual version. That's coming out of Spartanburg, South Carolina, heading up to Frederick, Maryland, AOPA headquarters. And I know that might look bad to some folks. You can see some blue on the other side there. It was not relatively clear in Spartanburg when I was departing, and it was fine on the other side of this, but there was a period where I'm kind of between layers. It's absolutely rock solid air, and I'm sure you've experienced this. Those are stratus clouds, Pat. Yeah. It was like sitting in your living room. It was just so comfortable and pleasant, but it does look daunting. And I will tell you, if I was a 100-hour pilot, I wouldn't even have thought about that.
Right.
But having a bit more experience, having GPS on board. Now, the flip side of that, and that was me going back to my original airport where I did my training. I soloed at Brainerd Field in Hartford, Connecticut. My mom still lives there, as long as I had to go to Maryland. And if you look at a map, you'll notice from Florida to Maryland, Connecticut's right on the way. It's just a few hundred miles north. So you barely even notice the hook around. But I went up there, and it is one of those airports that, unfortunately, it's the capital city of Connecticut. The city commission actually wants to shut the airplane down. Thank goodness they don't have the authority to do that. But it's a great underutilized airport right on the Connecticut River. It's got so much potential. But I soloed there, and I got to land on the same runway I did my original solo on. I'm going to ask Donnie, I'm going to ask you for one more picture of that Gulf Coast shot. Now, as you know, Pat, I'm a remarkably lazy individual. I don't care for doing actual work. This is how hard it is to navigate home for me from Pensacola, way out at the far western edge of Florida. All I have to do is get in the air and follow that beach. Now, it's not real challenging, but it is pretty. There's airports all along there, so I have places to go if I have a problem. But this is just the most gorgeous thing. It's part of what I really love about flying in the Southeast. And it's true, you know, wherever you fly. Pat, when we flew out in Texas, it's just a gorgeous place. But there is a wide spectrum of what that weather can look like and how challenging it is. But in both those cases, the one with the stratus clouds and that one with just severe clear along the beach, just stable as could be, even a little 152, just really, really enjoyable.
So basically what you're telling me is that you were flying under IFB rules?
I don't even want to know, but I'm compelled to ask. I follow beaches.
What else could it be?
Well, I'll tell you, there's first time I went to Key West was 30 years ago. It was just great. One of the things you can do in Florida, and I don't know if you can do this anywhere else, you get off the east coast of Florida, and I mean just a quarter mile off the beach, just like that picture that you were seeing of the Gulf Coast. You can have VFR flight following and ask for at or below 500, and they'll give it to you because you're down below the approach for all those east-west runways. You can fly all the way to Key West at 400 feet. You've got an emergency landing strip just to your right as you're headed south. It's an absolutely beautiful flight. And you know, Pat, in Florida, there's an airport every 7 miles. So
exactly.
There's someplace to go. But I want to know about your Lajitas trip. I mean, I can go on forever about Key West or the Gulf Coast, and by the way, that is the Redneck Riviera, that beach thing. That's what that's known as. That's a real thing. We don't take it as a slight. We're quite proud of it. But tell
Well,
me about your Lajitas trip.
well, before I tell you about Lajitas, just for a second, I noticed that Cavalier came in, says, late to the show, why aren't weather reports given in plain English? Well, it depends on what you're talking about, because METARs, which of course is what is, not what is forecast, those can be translated into plain English with the push of a button. And the same thing with TAFs. But here's the thing. If you get good at reading coded weather, and it's not hard,
No,
it's
not
much
at all.
easier to spot a trend. For example, if you're doing your flight plan, and one of my favorite flight planners is 1-800-WXBrief.com. If you put in your flight plan and hit submit, you're going to get back a split screen. And depending on what you choose, METAR or TAF, you're going to get all of those along your route on the left-hand side of that split screen. They line up. The temperatures and dew points typically line up on the METARs. The sky conditions typically line up on the TAFs. And literally at the snap of a finger, if it's coded weather, you can determine what the trend is instantly. And the same thing with a TAF. You can determine what the trend is being forecast to be in an instant. And you can't do that, not easily, with plain English weather. Nothing
Well, and
against plain
I
English.
just taught a Rusty Pilot this past Saturday down in Naples, Florida, and we typically teach the Rusty Pilot, and we might be dealing with people who haven't flown in 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
I can have them reading METARs reliably inside 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
It's a super simple. It is gibberish when you look at it. It makes no sense. But if somebody walks you through 2 or 3 of them, it's the same pattern every time. By the way, I still want to hear about Lajitas, but I got to say, Aviate 68 says he's applying for the AOPA Advanced Training Scholarship this year. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, we'll get this IFR ticket soon. Hey, apply for that. Not just Aviate 68. Any of you, if you're interested in going for an advanced rating, an instrument rating, commercial, whatever. Put in for a scholarship. You might get it. And we give away a whole bunch of them. By the way, that's true for high school students, private pilot applicants, things like that. If you have your knowledge test done, apply for the AOPA scholarship. It's a huge help. And those scholarships are out there.
They sure are. So you would ask about Lajitas. Funny you should ask. It's almost like we planned this. So this is several years ago. My wife and I and some friends of ours, my partner in the Cirrus and his wife, decided that we wanted to go out to Big Bend, and it's way, way out in the middle of nowhere. Well, actually, it's not in the middle of nowhere, Jamie, but you can see nowhere from there. That's how far out it is. It's actually south and west of Del Rio, so you have to go to Del Rio and then hang a kind of a left. But you can't go direct from here to there, otherwise you're over Mexican airspace. So we hook around Del Rio, and then the terrain gets interesting. Donnie, can you put up the cloud picture that I sent you? I don't know if you've got that handy. I don't think it's it. That's it. So we're on IFR flight plan over the top. Now you see that mound there, just kind of center left of the shot. That's mountains. That's Mexico. That's how close we are. And this is just a cell phone camera right there. Okay, now that's good, Donnie. So if you can now put up the next one, the one that's the ForeFlight image, this is the terrain over which we were flying when I took that shot. So it's pretty foreboding terrain. You can see it's 5,200 feet, 6,900 feet, 8,200 feet is the maximum elevation figure, some of those places. And we're very, very close to the ADIZ, and we're in that, you see that kind of blue shaded area that we're flying in, folks, at 8,500 feet, which is, no, we were at westbound. So actually we were at 10,000 feet on this trip because we couldn't reach flight service any lower than that. We were in, most of that was in Class G airspace. Most of that was in Class G airspace. That's what that blue shaded line is. You don't see it very many places in the United States. But this was a great trip from Houston. It was about 3 hours and 20 minutes or so. Most of it either IMC or IFR VFR on top. It cleared out beautifully. By the time we got to Lajitas, it was clear and visibility unlimited in some of the most gorgeous yet foreboding terrain over which I have ever flown. And it made me really think about, were we prepared? Had we had a forced landing, were we prepared for that? And, we talk about that in a Rusty Pilot seminar. And I have to tell you, everybody is human. And it just didn't occur to me what terrain that we'd be flying over to go down to Lajitas. I'd never flown out there before. I didn't realize just how foreboding it is. So the next time we make that trip, I will have some space blankets and, all the other stuff, extra water, all of those things I'll have with me that we just didn't think about taking. It was just dumb aeronautical decision making or planning anyway. So, but it was
I'm going to get you off the hook here. I'm going to get you off the hook 100% because I just learned something. I live in Florida, which the highest elevation here is 300 and some odd feet. So those numbers you're talking about make me dizzy because I don't ever get up that high. But, I had never really thought about that blue shaded area that's Gulf airspace, which means there's no ATC services. There's no air traffic control in Gulf. Is that just because it's so mountainous they can't reliably get a signal through? Do you know?
Well, it doesn't mean that there's no services available. It just means it's uncontrolled airspace. So we were talking to ATC the whole way.
Oh, okay.
We didn't have a problem with that. We did want to call flight service, though. However, on I don't remember what the frequency was that we called them on because 122.2 is the universal frequency almost anywhere in the continental United States if you're above 5,000 feet. And I don't remember if we used that one or a different one, but we had trouble. The reason we ended up at 10,000 feet is because I wanted to talk to flight service, and I think it was Albuquerque radio, and we couldn't get them any lower. But there was no reliable weather coverage on ADSB. Maybe it was XM. I forget which one it was now, but there was no reliable weather coverage in Lajitas. They didn't have an AWOS or an ASOS. The closest place was Presidio, and that was 60 miles or 70 miles further west. They were reporting clear, but as you said, terrain can make an issue, can become an issue. You have localized fog because of all the lakes in your area. I didn't know what to expect. So we were looking for somebody that could look at radar real time as it gets when you're talking to flight service and be able to say, yeah, well, look, it looks clear down there and so on and so forth. And it was gorgeous, and it ended up being just an awesome trip. But those kind of trips are not without their challenges. When you start talking about making essentially a 400 or a 500 mile trip, you could potentially be flying through at least one weather system, if not more.
Yeah.
You better make sure that you're prepared for that. And in this particular case, we were flying a technically advanced aircraft, and we had done a tremendous amount of pre-flight planning to make sure we were clear of Mexican airspace. Making sure that the airport was attended, because it's a part-time attendant at the airport. You have to let them know when you're coming, and they'll send somebody there basically to greet you. Yeah. So it took a fair amount of planning, that particular trip.
Well, and that's part of the interesting part, because as you say, you have to do some planning. And I was lucky last year. I got to come out to Texas and pick up an airplane from you, Pat, and fly back here to Florida. And it was a great experience because the day I got there was nice, and we got to fly out to lunch and all that. But then the weather kind of got a little hinky for a couple of days, and just have to wait to go. And that system moved east, but I was moving east. So we sat down and did some planning in the front room there at the airport. But I had a fuel stop planned for Jennings, Louisiana, a place I'd never been in my life, but it's just a little non-towered airport. And actually, the airport property encompasses the hotels and everything there, but it's right along I-10. It's an easy place to find. Really diverse aircraft, but it's just a non-towered airport. It was beautiful weather all the way from Houston to Jennings, Louisiana. But when I got there, even though it was great weather, I knew that 25 miles in front of me, it went IFR.
Yeah.
So you just have no choice. And I ended up staying there for 3 days. And I'll tell you what, the thing I love is still it happened to me on my first long cross country as a private student. I went to St. Simon's Island, Georgia.
Yeah.
And I land and I get out of the airplane and there's a guy right there who says, "Hey, you need fuel or oil?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. Thanks." He said, "Okay, the girl at the desk has keys to the van and there's a restaurant down here and there's a restaurant down there." I had no idea they would treat me so well. I mean, they've got my airplane as collateral, but still.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened in Jennings, Louisiana. The nicest people ever. I had a pretty considerable walk from where the airplane was tied down to the hotel, and I asked the guy who ran the FBO if there was a Uber or taxi service or anything. He says, "Oh, I got a courtesy car for you." And I said, "Well, I'm heading east, and the weather's kind of dicey, so I'll probably be here a few days." He's like, "That's okay." And I mean, literally, total stranger. They just give you a van. Yeah, go drive around, whatever you need to do.
I mean, it's not like you were topping off a C-130 or anything like that either.
No, I think I was taking like 14 gallons of
Yeah, you were topping off a C-152.
Darn right.
That's bigger. See, it's better.
I love that part, though. There's these happy accidents that happen. And as a matter of fact, Donnie, you've got a picture there of Fitzgerald, Georgia. Never been to Fitzgerald, Georgia. Had no intention of going to Fitzgerald, Georgia. But just the way things are, I had to stop there for fuel. There's only one person on the field, the airport director. And it's just the nicest, prettiest place with a little stone walkway and shade trees and rocking chairs right in the front. Oh. That is the nicest place. And they just treat you like gold. And all I did was stop in for fuel, and I started talking to the airport director, who's the only other person there, and he says, "Hey, I'll help you fuel the plane. I'm not doing that much." And we're chatting. It turns out we have mutual friends. A friend of mine taught him to fly, and it's just these happy accidents of going on a general aviation flight, whether it's 20 miles away or 200 miles away or 2,000 miles away. These are experiences you just don't get at the international airport when you're flying on the big airlines. You just bump into the most interesting people in these situations. You can actually become friends with people that you've never even met.
Yeah, I know. General aviation is really a remarkable thing. I mean, we are so blessed. We are so lucky that we get a chance to do this. And it sounds hokey, but I can't imagine doing anything else. It's amazing.
Now, you were talking about flying Lahidas, and the SR-22, right, Cirrus?
Yeah.
So you're planning for fairly long legs. You've got great equipment, so you're going IFR and 400 or 500 mile legs. Is that right?
Yeah. It's capable of that for sure.
Now, when I'm in the 152, especially a 152 with standard tanks, so I've only got 20 gallons of fuel, I'm looking at 200-mile legs, and I can go farther. But as you know, Pat, I'm extraordinarily cowardly. I don't want to get anywhere near the fuel limits of the airplane. So the point being, you can plan a really long flight. I mean, a flight that will take days to complete. And it's really just a series of shorter flights, the same thing you do on your private pilot check ride, where, you've had to do cross-country flights. You've actually done this before. And if you've got any discomfort, you can do what a coward like me does. When I was flying in Houston, Pat and I sat down for a good half hour, 40 minutes, going over the local airspace. And gee, there's 2 Bravos here, and you can follow I-10 because it's like 24 lanes wide. You can see it from the moon. I mean, but having that insight of just asking somebody local, "Hey, how would you navigate this route?" That's a huge help.
Yes, it is. Calling, and the same, I guess almost the reverse applies if you're flying into an area that you don't know. There's nothing wrong with calling the local FBO and asking if there's any local knowledge that you should be aware of before you come busting into their traffic pattern. Because there very well may be. They may have a non-standard traffic pattern. Maybe it's right-hand traffic. At Ellington Field, now admittedly it's a Class Delta airport here in Houston, but Ellington has a 600-foot traffic pattern. It's because they're very close to Hobby, which is a main airport. But that's not uncommon. Well, let's just say it's not unheard of at non-towered airports in various parts of the country where it may not be a standard 1,000-foot traffic pattern. So you kind of want to do your due diligence, checking the chart supplement, making sure you look at your charts, look at the information you can get on ForeFlight or any of the other good flight planning guides that are out there. AOPA has a very good flight planner, and there's a bunch of others as well. So I got to do your due diligence.
That's something I have to really pay attention to, because flying here in Florida, most airports, the pattern altitude is 1,000 feet, because we're not, we're most of us are within 100 feet of sea level.
Yeah.
But when I go up north, for instance, when I went to Hartford's right on the Connecticut River, so it's only a few feet above sea level itself. But Worcester, Massachusetts, that's just up the road, that field elevation is like 1,000 feet. So you really do have to look beforehand. You can't just assume I'm going to enter a 1,000-foot traffic pattern, because that's not going to work. You might be in the dirt in some places.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That planning part's part of what makes it fun, though, because you've got so many options. And, even if you're planning on making a couple fuel stops throughout the day and you're not pushing yourself hard, you're going to go 400 miles, 600 miles. That's not that tough.
Yeah.
But you can start looking at what's interesting nearby, what's within walking distance. And there are so many websites and so much information about restaurants or museums. And there's absolutely great places. There's a place in Texas that you've been to, Fredericksburg, I think.
Yeah.
They speak German there.
Yeah, Fredericksburg, I think it's Tango 82, if I remember right. Fredericksburg is a beautiful little German town in the hill country. So it would be north and west of Austin, probably more west than north. But anyway, it's about an hour and 20-minute flight from here, an hour and a half in the 182 maybe. And it's a German town. They have a diner on the field, so that's number one for a destination. They have a hotel on the field. It's called the Hangar Hotel, and it's a hangar, World War II era vintage hangar that was converted into a hotel. It's just gorgeous, and they've got cars on the field that you can rent, or Uber that you can call and go into town. And the Nimitz Museum is there in downtown Fredericksburg. And if you're any kind of a naval history buff, or just World War II in general, going there and seeing the Nimitz Museum is really, really worth the trip. So any of my Texas peeps who haven't been to Fredericksburg, that would be a trip worthwhile. Another really good one, Jamie, and you pass by that going home, is New Orleans. New Orleans has this amazing World War II museum. And speaking of which, on your trip home, you pass by Pensacola, which has the Naval Air Station has a museum there. Now, I don't know if that's open yet. It was closed and has been closed due to COVID. I don't know if it's open yet. You might know.
I was there before COVID. It's a free museum because it's government operated, and it is one of the best museums I've ever been to. And you're right. I seriously considered landing in Pensacola, except for my 3-day hang up in Jennings. I would have. And that's just the greatest place in the world. I absolutely love it.
Well, there's actually one place that's equally as great, and that is the Wright Museum, or the at Wright-Patterson, the museum in Dayton.
Yeah.
That place, unbelievable. It goes right along with Udvar Hazy. If we have a chance, I'll tell you about my Cirrus flight into Dulles, but it's right up there with Udvar Hazy. So there's, we could talk for hours about this, because there literally are so many places. There's a little place north and a little bit west of Tyler, Texas, called Mineola. And Mineola, that airport is owned by the Weisener family. It's been in the family since, I think it's 1903. It's the oldest, I think it's the oldest privately owned airport in the state of Texas. And they have a little mini museum there. They don't advertise it, but in that museum, they have the airframe of a Jenny, a 1918 Jenny. The engine's not on it. There's no fabric.
You connected me to somebody there, because I think my high school flying club owns a Cub that used to belong to them.
Yes, you did. In fact, that's the lady you talked to, Lupita Weisner.
Yeah, and we're rebuilding that airplane now. It's going to continue living on.
And so you talk about small world. Here's another excellent example of what a small world.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so you never know where you're going to find just some real hidden treasures, and that's an excellent example of them. And of course, you have Kermit Weeks down there, not very far from where you are.
Yep. Fantasy of Flight.
Yeah. So I mean, we're not even at the tippy tip of the end of the iceberg. There's so much.
Oh, there's so many cool places. I mean, there's Goodspeed Airport in Connecticut along the Connecticut River, which right near the Goodspeed Opera House. I mean, it's just things you wouldn't even expect. By the way, I gotta get in some comments here. Aviate 68 acknowledges local knowledge is king. Thank you for saying it, Aviate 68, because it's true. You can always ask at the FBO, ask a local CFI, even call ahead and verify, hey, do you really have fuel? Because you're a good fuel stop for me. Do you actually have some right now? Local knowledge is great. Bearded Aviator says where he is in Northwest Georgia, average airport elevations between 500 and 1,500. That's going to be a challenge if you just take off without planning and think, well, I'll enter a 1,000-foot traffic pattern. You'd be 500 feet below ground. That's going to get a little weird. And let's see, Aviate 68 says Wyoming airports are about 5,000 to 8,000 feet, depending on what side of the square you're at. Got to be careful taking a standard 172 up on a hot day. And that is true. I used to own a 1940 J3 Cub, 65 horsepower. I was talking to my buddy Michael Maya Charles out in Colorado about it because he knows everything about everything. And he said, yeah, we don't have those here because they won't leave the ground. They'll just taxi real fast.
So here's a trivia question. This could be a stump the listener question.
Uh-oh.
So you're out in Wyoming and you've got an airport that's at 6,000 feet MSL. At what altitude does the odd and even cruising altitude rule kick in?
Ooh, that's tricky. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. I like that. If anybody's got an answer for Pat, go ahead and stick it in there. You might get lucky. And Eric Pittman, I'm talking to you. Go ahead. Harry Johns, put something in there if you like. Pat, I want to touch on the dream trip before we leave.
Yeah.
I've got a couple places that I really want to go, and I have not gone yet. I've been to these places, but I have not flown to them. Do you have any place that you really want to fly to one day and you just haven't gotten there yet?
You know, you warned me that this question was coming, and while we've been talking, I've been kind of mulling it over, and I'm sure that there is, but you know, I've flown to Atlanta, I've flown to Birmingham, Alabama, where I was born, several times. I've flown back to Michigan a couple of times. I've flown to Denver a couple of times. Flown to Oshkosh and Sun and Fun more times than I can count over the years. Flown out to Lajitas. Probably the Bahamas. That was a trip that we were going to make a few years ago, and we were about ready to pull the trigger and go, except that the forecast for that week was for 40 to 50% chance of rain. And we just, if we're going to go to the Bahamas, we don't want to be rained. It's, kept inside. So,
Yep.
So we scuttled that trip, and it might be the Bahamas. And by the way, we've gotten several people that say 3,000 feet AGL, which is absolutely right. So with a 6,000 foot MSL airport, that rule kicks in at 9,000 feet. At 9,000 feet.
My airplane is not going to 9,500. I'm sorry.
And by the way, it kicks in at 9,000 feet, which means the next available altitude is going to be 9,500 or 10,500 and so on and so forth. So yeah, you would never make it up there.
Ingram even put the top on. Ingram put in flight level 180. You're right. From 3,000 AGL to 18,000. You're correct.
This proves what I was telling you earlier. We have the smartest viewers of any webinar ever.
Yes, we do. And Ingram just recently got his ticket, so he is fresh. It's all sharp, and he's on top of it. I've got a couple places I want to go to, and I'll tell you, I've been to Key West a number of times. Started going when it was still a little podunk place, and I loved it. And your choice is, do I fly along the island chain, or do I fly over water? And I've done both, and it's absolutely great. Marathon as well is good. But I really want to go to Walterboro, South Carolina, and I've been there on the ground, but I've never flown in. And it's because the Tuskegee Airmen were at Walterboro, and I was good friends with Hiram Mann, who was a Tuskegee. I was very lucky late in their lives. I got to get to know a number of Tuskegee Airmen, really good guys, Roscoe Brown and Leo Gray and Hiram and a variety of them, just terrific guys who had fantastic stories. And I would just like to touch down on the same runway because it still is the same runway. There's a museum to them now, and it's really impressive. The other one is I'd like to go to an airport that's the name has changed, but when I was a little kid, it was Williams Air Force Base outside of Phoenix, Arizona. That's where I started out life. My dad was an F-86 pilot there, and I would just like to take off and land at Williams. I just think that would be the neatest thing in the world. Obviously not in an F-86, and hopefully in a Cirrus or something else that's got air conditioning, because I've lived in the Phoenix area in the summer. Not an enjoyable experience, but those are places I would really like to go again. And you know what? I just might get there.
You know, as you were talking about that, it did remind me that I've got a really good friend from high school, and we have stayed in touch, although we haven't seen each other a lot over the last number of years. But he is and was an excellent drummer, and he and I worked together in a couple of bands when I lived in Michigan, and just a really fine drummer, and we became very, very good friends over the years. And he's in St. Simon. And he keeps inviting us to come over there. And one of these days we will do that because Have Airplane will travel.
There's a really neat aviation themed hotel right on the field at St. Simon's Island, Georgia. It's beautiful. And Joshua Estrada Delaney says, just got his private pilot certificate 2 weeks ago. Yeah, can't wait to start planning my first trip. Being up in Alaska, it should be awesome. Here's a little tidbit of oddity. I live right smack dab in the center of Florida, but it's where Jack Brown's seaplane base is. We get all kinds of people who train here or instructors who fly here and then go up to Alaska just to have that experience. So Joshua, ask around. We might have mutual friends. Eric Pittman says, if I go to Walterboro to let him know, because we'll hang out and have lunch. I have met Eric. He's a good guy. And I would do that, Eric. I'll let you know. Bearded Aviator says he's a current renter. Just climbing into the 172 to 12,500 feet would take almost a whole hour of rental. Trust me, in the 152 with me in it, I'm not getting there. It's not going to happen.
That would be a 3-day climb for you, I think.
I'll tell you, when I first started working at AOPA, I was up at headquarters once. And somebody asked me, what's the highest you've ever been in a 152? And at that time, it was 5,500 feet. And I told them that was the highest I'd ever been in a 152. They said, oh, I've been to 8,500 feet. And I'm like, I live on a sandbar. 5,500 was unnecessary.
Jamie, I hate to tell you what the very first thing that flashed through my mind, knowing that you're a musician, when you ask what's the highest you've been.
Oh, you're a bad person, Pat Brown. Since Pat's being irreverent and needs to be smacked, let me remind the viewers, I would like you to do me 2 favors, if you would. Go ahead and hit the like button on this because it actually does help the algorithm and it'll be easier to find us in the future. And second of all, if you're willing, and Pat, I really hope they are, share the link to this. Let your friends know you watched it and you enjoyed it and tell folks to come out because you know what? We're kind of having fun. Oh, Roland Hernandez says, this is right up your alley, Pat. How do I get certified to pilot in Corpus Christi, Texas? It's a federal thing. I mean, if you're certificated, you're certificated. But yeah. Roland, are you a certified pilot? Do you have your ticket, or are you a student who's thinking about getting into it?
Yeah, because that's two different answers, depending. Because if I read the question to mean, is there a flight school in Corpus that I can become certificated? The answer is yes. Is your student pilots. So, okay. So then the question is how do you get endorsed to fly to Corpus? All right, so
I'm gonna make this simple. Roland, grab a pen. I'm gonna give you a second here. Grab a pen. You want to send an email to pat.brown@aopa.org, and he will answer that question for you. He will even talk to you on the phone if you want to and tell you how to get that done, because he's in Texas. And you probably don't know this, but we refer to him within the organization as Your Excellency, because he is. So there you go. What is Erdem asks a really good question, and if you're flying a carbureted airplane on a long trip, this is going to come up. What is the carburetor icing condition? You know, I live in Florida. Carburetor icing is prime time all the time. At 80 degrees with high humidity, carburetor icing is a real possibility because the fuel atomizes into the carburetor, which cools the air down. The air accelerates through the venturi, which cools the air down. The water evaporates out of it and wants to sublimate to the walls, which cools it down. And believe it or not, on an 85-degree day, you can have carburetor icing, and I can attest to it. It happens.
You know, one thing I was looking, I don't remember why, but I was looking for some information on carburetor ice. And like everyone else, I went to Google, which is the repository of the entire world's knowledge. And I put in a search, I think I put in a search something about carburetor icing, or I don't remember exactly, but a bunch of things came back, but there was a really good chart that came back that showed basically it was a graph, a straight line graph with a whole bunch of colors that were, formed an interesting pattern. But it was a really good chart that showed you what temperature and humidity combinations basically put you in the red zone.
Yeah.
And I looked at that, and I mean, I know that carburetor ice can happen virtually anytime, anywhere. I get that. We've been teaching that for years. But I don't think I even realized what the width and breadth of temperature and humidity combinations you can have and get carburetor icing. And it was like that for me was like an really aha moment.
Yeah, it's a very broad spectrum. I mean, the temperature range and humidity is huge, but it can happen. And man, it sneaks up on you insidiously. The last time it happened to me, I was actually coming home from Pensacola. I had long-range tanks, so I'd been flying for about 4 hours. And I was just tired and kept bumping up the throttle because the RPMs were dropping a little bit. Not a lot, 7,500 RPMs, I'd bump it up. And about the fourth time I did it, it didn't really come back. So you turn on the carburetor heat and I land right next to airport and give it an hour to thaw out. And
that's
hey,
the
look
one.
at that.
Donnie, you are the man. That's
the producer of the year. I'm telling you, this guy deserves a raise.
That's exactly the chart I was talking about. I've got a copy of that in a folder that I take with me when I'm doing check rides in case the subject of carb ice comes up. Thank you, Donnie. That's awesome.
By the way, when Pat says doing check rides, he doesn't mean he's getting a new certificate. He is a designated pilot examiner. That's why he's Your Excellency. He really is a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. And Paula Stover-Weibel says, Donnie's awesome, and she knows. That's true. Thank you, Paula. I love knowing that you're in here with us. John Matthews says, fuel injection fixes carb icing. You are correct, but it introduces the hot start problem. So that's a whole other episode for a whole other show. By the way, we'll be back here. Well, I shouldn't say we'll be back here. I should say he'll be back here for episode 31 on January 25th. I will be in Fort Myers, Florida, teaching a Rusty pilot program on a rare Tuesday night. Who knew? But Pat will be back with Kay Sundrum, who is winging her way back from Hawaii right now to her Southern California home. It's been great hanging out with you tonight. Go ahead and write in on the comments any topics you'd really like us to cover. And you had some great comments tonight. Be sure to hit the like button, share this link if you would, and let people know that you saw it. And Pat, I'm looking forward to the next time we get to do this. And I'm sorry I'll be out of town next time, but I do it from the hotel, but I don't think I could be doing a Rusty pilot and an Ask It Ambassador at the same time. That'd be challenging.
You underestimate your talents, Jamie. I have faith in you.
Well, I'll see what I can do. We will talk. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll see you back here next time. Fly safe. Take care and apply for those AOPA scholarships because you just might get one. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, y'all.